Mr. Ustinov, Hammersmith Is Out, an unusual title. What's the film about?
Well, I suppose it can be considered a very free variation on the Faust legend. It's really about a homicidal maniac played by Burton, who's locked up in an asylum and tempts the male nurse, who is a wretched little character played, I think, brilliantly by Beau Bridges, who's got a girlfriend, Elizabeth Taylor, who is the entire night staff of a sleazy restaurant on the freeway. And I'm the sort of tarnished archangel that runs the establishment and knows that Hammersmith, the devil, is always going to get out. And they go through society with various adventures. And of course, it's a film which is a little bit on a knife edge because it isn't as tidy as the film with a definite plot and definite characters, like all those things, like Pilgrim's Progress, or I'm not putting it up on a pedestal or trying to frighten people, but or Candide, or those things. It's a rapid glimpse of the way society seems to be shaping today.
Is it a film in which you use one of your foreign accents?
One of the few at my disposal I sometimes trot out, and this one I thought would be more effective if he was German, being a psychiatrist.
You have this gift of mimicry. Is this because of your mixed Russian-German background?
Well, I think you ought to include the Ethiopian, though, which very few people know about.
Tell me about that.
Oh, Granny. Well, never mind. I think it's mixed blood helps, of course.
You're an actor, an author, a producer, a director, with a great love of music. Do you play a musical instrument?
No, I used to play the flute. I tried the piano, but of course I can't read many notes at once. So I tried to simplify it by playing the flute, not because I loved the flute, but because there was a shortage of flutes in the school orchestra. This is nearly always what happens. And since nature has been generous as far as lips are concerned, I must say, without undue vanity, I often got the right note, but very rarely the right octave, so I dropped the flute.
I've seen you from time to time mimic an orchestra, or at least a quartet.
Oh, I'm ambitious.
Is this compensation for not being able to play, say, a bassoon or something like that?
Yes, it is. I love the bassoon more than anything, but I never took it up because it's rather too heavy to carry in the underground of places. But I've reached the time of life when people are compensating me now for growing old by offering me honorary degrees, which happens to people at my age.
I see you got one from Cleveland.
I got one for music, yes, and I'm not really qualified. But the first one was for laws from Dundee, and I really don't know much about that.
Have you written any music yourself?
No, I wrote a national anthem for a play of mine, which I still whistle occasionally. It is strangely beautiful.
You haven't orchestrated it, have you?
No, I would be incapable of doing that.
You couldn't give us a blast of it now, on the bassoon which you carry inside you.
Oh, well, I don't think I can do it on a bassoon, but the tune I thought was rather good. Da-da-da-dum, for a national anthem. I hate them. Da-da-da-da, da-da-da-dee-da-da-dum, da-da-dee-da-da-da-da-dee-dum, da-da-da-dee-da-dee-da-da-da-dum, da-dum, da-dum, ba-dum, ba-boom-boom-boom, dee-da-da-dee-dee-da-da, da-da-da-dum, pum-pum, da-da-da-da-dee-da-dee-da-da-da-dum, da-dum, 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 boom-boom-boom.
It certainly
now
sounds...
you can sit down again.
It certainly sounds credible. Many years ago, Mr. Ustinov, you had two characters, the Bishop of Limpopo and I think a lady called Madame Beethoven Fink. Have they been consigned to silence?
No, they crop up sometimes. Limpopo crops up because I can still reach He Didn't Sing. The lady, I can't reach her notes anymore. But Limpopo does. He was the first person, he came to lecture to us in Westminster School. And when I entered the theatre, I used him rather unpleasantly as a means to get my first job.
How did he go?
Well, he was an old English colonial cleric who said that he remembered his youth and his first experiences in Africa, and how a native boy had run up to him in a clearing and said, "Who do you know? Well, what was I to do? I had two courses left open to me. Naturally, I chose the second. I said to him, "Undungu, dungu." Well, not unnaturally at that, he grew very excited. What was one to expect from a youth of his age? And he, unfortunately, I think, said, and I looked him deep in the eye and I said to him, so I think you can see from this that religion is still very much alive in the heart of Africa.
Quite recently you took part in what might seem something very difficult. You played Lord North, being interviewed by a commentator in America. Now, you did this totally unscripted.
Yes, I've just done George III. That's why I haven't got a beard. Not only didn't George III have a beard, but with a wig and a beard, you couldn't see the face at all. So I came to certain conclusions, and anyway, I took it off. And it's, I think, a very interesting way of going about it, because what I did was to steep myself in George III or Lord North before. In fact, George III wrote some letters which are much more revealing for this kind of performance than our historians' writing. And then was interviewed by Eric Severide, who's the head of CBS News Department, as though I was Nixon or Heath or Lynch.
But was it an uneasy situation?
No, very interesting, because I found that by slowing down my thought processes, and anyway I had a wig on and the close of the period, I could come out with long, complicated sentences, quite naturally in the style of the 18th century. Nowadays we don't allow ourselves to do that because we really talk in telegrams, because we all have time limits.
You came to Ireland, I think, first many years ago as a member of PEN, of P-E-N. Are you a joiner? Do you join organizations?
No, I'm not a joiner at all. I'm a member of that. I still am a member of that, though I don't go very often. But I remember that meeting with great affection, because the theme of the Congress in Ireland was the literature of small nations. And all the Lithuanian authors were in national costume, I remember. And a great feeling of triumph, and that the great the mainstream of literature had been bypassed by this. And it all went well until the Irish Minister of Education, I think, addressed us in Gaelic. And I looked at the disappointment on the face of the Lithuanian delegation when they found they couldn't understand it either.
You had, I think, a Japanese guide at that time, did you?
Well, there was a
fellow
Japanese
delegate.
Well, this was before we realized the full potential of the Japanese mind. And we had a delegate who was the professor of Irish studies at Tokyo, but had never been here. And a guide, very kindly given us by the Irish Tourist Bureau, took us to various pubs and things and said, well, now, that's the place in the pub where James Joyce is reputed to have sat and worked on Ulysses and poems penny each. And in fact, there's a slight stain which is alleged to be still the remaining marks of a defective fountain pen he was employing at the time. And the Japanese then consulted his books and said, oh no, as James Joyce, other pub, but this Oliver St. John fountain pen. And eventually he won the day. The Irish guide was absolutely discountenanced, daren't open his mouth at the end. He said, well, this is another historic pub. And,
you had a good time anyway.
Oh, I always do.
What about critics, Mr. Ustinov? Do they bother you at all?
Difficult to say. I of course get upset if they affect the commercial efficacy of what I've done, because the money in it is not mine. But actually upset me not for very long, because I'm so used to a thing going badly somewhere and then suddenly it gets rave notices in Yugoslavia from Serbo-Croat critics that are at least as valid as the ones that have been unpleasant. So one learns to, of course, one of the first things of growing up, the most important thing of growing up, is to learn to live with injustice, or what you believe to be injustice. And once you've learnt that, you can live miserably ever after.